and welcome to the MELTA podcast. Joining me today is Birgitta Berger. Now, Birgitta has been teaching English at the Montessori school in Munich for over 20 years. She's also the author of 3 books dealing with teaching English in a multilingual environment, and we are going to be speaking about all of those things this evening with Birgitta. Birgitta, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's lovely to see you.
Well, hello, Mike, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor and pleasure.
One of the things I wanted to start talking about, Birgitta, is the whole area of multilingualism. I know that you were brought up actually living in England, but with German parents, right? Which I guess
right.
may have influenced your later life and career as a teacher of languages and in a multilingual environment, as it were. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a little about that to start with.
Well, definitely. Yes, I see that as one of the greatest gifts I received from my parents. Their courage to, as a young married couple in the early 60s, going to England and starting a family there and bringing up their children, me and my younger sister. So German was our family language, the very first language I learned. But as soon as I was sort of up and about and making friends in the neighborhood and so on, English became a very strong second language. And I went to kindergarten, primary school, and so on in England, in London and sort of nearby. And so growing up with 2 languages was something I was aware of as a child, because there was also a time at school. You see, we're talking about the 60s, mid 60s, a time when Germans weren't always that popular and that welcome everywhere. So there was a time when I told my mother I didn't want to speak German anymore, and I wanted to take my British passport, which I hold because I was born in the UK. I wanted to take that to school to prove that I was English, British, whatever. So yes, it's something I've always been aware of, and I've been very fortunate in just having the opportunity to use both languages, both privately and now professionally. And I was then lucky enough to grow up in my teens in Thailand, learning to speak Thai, which is a completely different language.
Oh, wow.
Appreciating the challenge of getting into a completely new sound system, different writing system, different.
So did you actually learn to speak Thai or
Yes, yes.
Wow.
I was 14 when we went there, and people tell me that I have practically no accent, which is, for a tonal language, quite hard to achieve at that age.
Right. Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that my Thai is perfect by any means, but somehow I worked out the sound system.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. So how did you get from there to Germany and Montessori, Birgitta?
So it was England. There were 2 years in Germany. Then it was 4 years in Thailand, going back to England to finish school at a 6th form college in Oxford. And then I came to Munich to study at the LMU here in Munich, political science, history and media communication studies. And I had started teaching English at high school, at my high school in Bangkok, tutoring a little Japanese boy and other kids. And then I had Thai students coming in to learn English with me. And my mum was also teaching English. So it was something that I'd always been doing sort of on the side. It was then great at university as a job to make money, making more money in an easier way than working in a restaurant or cafe.
Right.
And I worked at a language school here in Munich, met some people who, some of whom go back to very early or long ago MELTA days, John Sides.
Does that school still exist or not?
Yes, it is the In Lingua. I think it is still.
It's in Lingua.
Yes.
I worked myself in Lingua in Barcelona for a year.
Yes.
Many years ago too.
Yeah, and I actually really enjoyed that because I had no training as a teacher, but they used course books. They had sort of small groups, or I had a couple, a family who were emigrating to Australia, and the whole family had booked through in Lingua, and then we did sort of one-to-one lessons, which were basically based on their needs, not going through a course book, but finding out what do you want to have, what do you need, and working it that way. And I also did, later on, I did some company courses for AGFA, which, you know, the film AGFA Gevaert, BMW and so on. So it was something that was going on whilst I was at university. It was like two lives, this student life, political science, media communication studies, and then sort of that at LMU, which is a huge university. It's difficult to sort of feel at home there, I found. And I always felt at home in the staff room of this little in lingua language school. So yeah, it's something that I enjoyed doing. And then through my own children, when our older daughter was born and started kindergarten, that was the time when in Germany people were starting to think it would be sensible and would be nice to let children begin language learning at an earlier age than just school. At that time, they still started English in year 5, I believe, I think it was, or starting to move it forward into primary school. But this whole thing of Fremdsprachen, Frühbeginn, not primary, but, you know, early learners, young learners, very young learners, was just beginning. So at my daughter's kindergarten, I said, if you like, I'll just come in once a week and do a bit of English with them. And I enjoyed it, and they did too. And we enrolled her in the Montessori school. And during the whole sort of registration process, you know, you talk about your skills, and parents are expected to get involved in the school with practical work, supporting the school. And they said, well, what are you good at? What can you do? And I said, well, I speak English, and I've, you know, been working as a teacher with kids and adults. And they said, we need an English teacher. I said, well, you know, I'm not trained to teach regular English at a school for German children, you know, being in Germany, where you have to be qualified for everything, especially at school. But they said, no, don't worry. We haven't got anyone at the moment. And could you take over the whole of primary? So year 1 to year 4, 6 to 10-year-olds. And I said, well, I'll have a go. But I did feel that I needed more. And I said, but how do you do this in a Montessori way? And they said, well, you can take a Montessori course. And that's what I did subsequently.
Just to come in there, Birgitta, sorry to interrupt. Because I just wanted to contrast, and I think it's quite interesting to contrast, because you worked in Lingua. Now, one of the things I remember about in Lingua was they pushed their particular method on you, which was the direct method, which meant that you were not supposed to speak any of the mother tongue language to of the students, only English, right? Now, that in contrast to the whole Montessori method, that must be quite a dramatic contrast, right?
Not necessarily. I think this approach of using the target language 100% all of the time is one that works very well if you are in a small group, if your learners are adults or very motivated. And it's something that was sort of expected of English teachers to be doing at school as well for quite a long time. Until a couple of years ago, linguists started looking at the competence that learners have, especially children have, in their first language, which they lose completely if you put them in this it's all English now situation. So that's something I experimented with at school. You see, I came in there and I started off just speaking English, and I realized that especially the little ones, they had no clue. I was just there for an hour or 90 minutes per week with one group. Not enough time to really get them immersed and finding their way, getting to know me, building a relationship, finding their way in this new language. So I was really happy in this concept that Wolfgang Butzkam, a professor at Bremen University, in his bilingual reform concept also suggested using a sandwich technique, saying things in English, then just giving them the German in a
Okay.
few words, and then saying it in English again.
All right.
So
Okay.
using as much of the target language as possible, but adding their first language, German in that case, as whenever needed, to
Yes.
make sure nobody got lost, nobody sort of felt left out, to just shorten some of the proceedings, you know. Very
Absolutely.
often
It can save
kids,
a lot of
you can
time.
just
Yes.
use body language and you can
Yeah.
show them a lot. But sometimes with older learners as well, you start explaining something in English and you try to describe it, and you realize they're just not getting it, or
Yeah.
they're on the wrong track because
Right.
they're thinking of a German word that actually isn't the equivalent. So why not shorten procedures by just saying, well, look, this is what it is in German. And
Right.
if you're able to do so, because I am able to speak both languages, then I use that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I couldn't agree more. It does sometimes save a lot of time and a lot of difficulties by just being able to give them the word or phrase that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
How does that work, Birgitta, when you are actually dealing with students who maybe don't speak German, who are from other linguistic backgrounds?
Yeah, at my current school, that's the situation I'm in. I have students who are from Ukraine, from Syria, from Afghanistan, for example, and especially the new arrivals may have more English competence than they do in German. So there we go to electronic devices or a dictionary. I try to supply English Arabic, English Russian dictionaries in the classroom as well. So it's not just the English German bilingual dictionaries. And actually, very often we're working with 3 languages because I know they need to learn German. And so we take the English word, we find the German, and then I ask them to work out what it is in their home language to make it a triangle. Which again is making use of their competence and their skill in their first language. The kids who've been here longer, in Farsi, for example, they say, oh, well, I've been here for 6-7 years now. I don't know that in my first language anymore. Then they teach each other because there's always somebody who does know.
So this is what you meant. I remember reading, I think it was in your first book, where you said that using in the classroom, actually using their L1, their mother tongue in some way, can actually be beneficial when it comes to learning a second or even third language, right?
Yeah, I definitely believe that is the case. It's something, you see, all learners need to relate new words to some kind of concept or image. It might be an image, it might be a picture of something, but if they have a double link to an image and a word they already know in their first language, then that's definitely going to be more effective, and it's going to be more sustainable, because it'll be a stronger link. If we look at it sort of from a neurological point of view, right? We're trying to establish as much brain activity and as many links as possible.
And this all fits into what you would call the Montessori ethos or methodology, would you say?
Definitely, because the Montessori pedagogy is based on the concept that learning starts from the child's standpoint or from where the child is. So it doesn't begin with the curriculum, it doesn't begin with the goal that you want to achieve. It starts out with where the child is and takes it through its own individual learning steps. So Montessori is sort of very individualized, allowing children to work at their own speed, with their own focus, perhaps. And that's, again, something that we find with language, that people don't learn languages in the same way. You have some people who are very analytical. They love doing grammar. They say, well, I need grammar. You have others who are sort of the auditive type and just say, I want to hear it. I want to see it. I want to do something. You have some who find it easier to work with written language and others who don't. They learn at different speeds. So yeah, that's why I believe it's It's
Yeah.
right, because you have 15 children or 25, depending on your group,
Yeah.
and they're all different. They're all different learner
Yeah.
types. They're different language learner types.
Yes. So I think you talk in your first book about the Montessori method, and it's aimed particularly at teachers. Feel free to add any other information about that, Birgitta. What I did want to ask you directly is your second book, which I found a fascinating concept, but I haven't had the opportunity to read it, unfortunately. You describe it as having a unique way to introduce tenses and to teach the English tense system to students. Could you just tell us something about that?
Mhm. Well, it's something, first of all, that I don't use with younger children,
Okay.
because they learn grammar as they learn lexis. They learn the sentence structure, they learn about different verb forms just from context. They need a lot of input, and they can then, based on models like a story, like Eric Carle, for example, or Diary of a Wombat, and so on. These books and these stories and these patterns give them structure that they can then model their language on, and they learn intuitively much more than they learn consciously. But older learners, especially sort of teens upward, very often want to see, how do you form verbs, how do you change words, and actually the verb forms and the use of tenses and aspects in the English language is one of the most challenging parts of becoming a more proficient speaker.
Right.
So that was something that I always came across with my teenage learners, and I was drawing timelines, and I found, I can never fit in all the tenses, because I had this idea, and that again is something that comes from Montessori. I wanted to provide a big picture, something that you can go to as a reference, where you can say, well, if I'm looking at this aspect, or I want to talk about this, then what do I do? Whereas in traditional grammar teaching, you tend to focus on one tense, and then you have a sort of contrastive tense. So it's comparing the present perfect and the simple past, for example. And it's just those two. But where do the others come in? So these timelines and pictures I was drawing were never big enough. So
you're saying that you would actually, instead of as possibly many of us are guilty of, saying, right, this for the next couple of weeks, we are going to be looking at the difference between the simple past and the present perfect. You're saying that they should all kind of been taught, or all of the tenses should be taught at the same time, or what?
No. Well, I don't teach tenses anyway. I've what I did was construct sort of a graph, a model in which you can find all the, actually it's not all that, it's the tenses and the aspects. So you have the present and the four aspects of the present, which is the way linguists talk about language and describe language. And it's a reference. So it gives you, there are pictures, there's like planet Earth, and the example sentence is, we live on planet Earth, and that is the present simple. And then you've got the present progressive, and you've got a picture of somebody balancing, and the example sentence is, she is balancing. So you've also got the present perfect. They all belong to the first circle of all the present and its aspects. To also make clear, because that's something for Germans is very difficult to grasp, that the present perfect is not a form of the past. They tend to use it, or coming from German, it's a way to talk about past events, especially in spoken language. But in English, it isn't. It has a different role and different function. And to make that visible, it's part of these aspects of the present. And then you've got the present perfect progressive, which isn't used very often, but it is there.
It's certainly not used very often by any of my students, so because I don't know if you have better luck.
I don't expect them to use it. You see, I can show them, look, present simple and present progressive, those are the ones you'll be using yourself most frequently. You need them for picture descriptions, you need them to talk about yourself. And then the present perfect comes in sometimes, but you may come across something like present perfect progressive once in a while. And again, there's a picture and a story. There are stories to go with each of these pictures to link that concept, the whole idea behind this tense and aspect with a picture, with an example sentence, and then context. Because actually, if we look at the English language, it depends very much on what I as a speaker want to express. It depends on my point of view, depends on the context.
That's right. A lot of students do kind of say, well, is this correct or incorrect? You tell them it's not actually.
And if you just have one sentence, you can't say. It could be present perfect. It could be past simple, depending on what it's all about.
Exactly.
And in real life, whenever in a situation where somebody says to us, please say this in past simple, or please use the present perfect. What we do find is that we read texts, and that's what I do as well. And then we analyze and we underline the verb forms that are being used, and we say, what's happening here? So it's about noticing language as a step towards then being able to use it ourselves.
Right. That's fascinating, isn't it? Let's move on, Birgitta. Your third book is about autonomous learning. And I think with this, you've kind of moved away from directly anything to do with the Montessori methodology, as it were.
I would say it's complementary to Montessori.
Fine, good. Then tell us a bit more about this, the whole concept of autonomous learning, please, Birgitta.
Yes, well, and it was specifically not published in the Montessori context because it is something that can be used in any classroom, in any setting. You can use it with children, teenagers, adult learners. It's all about empowering learners to take charge, to take ownership of their learning. That's sort of the basic concept. And it, as I said, it complements Montessori because Montessori doesn't have its own language teaching method. Maria Montessori, when she developed the pedagogy, it was for young children, preschool and primary. They were her main, right, they were her main focus. And in that day and age, 100 years ago, nobody was teaching children at that age or expecting them to learn foreign or additional languages. So there is nothing in Montessori in the classical Montessori teachings that would help us there. But the concept of taking each learner as an individual matches very well with learner autonomy. And learner autonomy says that what we want is for learners to be motivated. And they are more motivated if what's going on in the classroom is authentic, has something to do with them. So again, with teenagers or even adult learners, it's if you're talking about yourself or you're talking to your partner about what they experienced, what happened last weekend and so on, it's of much greater interest than trying to construct situations that are sort of very, very construed. And the other side of learner autonomy is providing tools or activities for learners to use in which they can become more independent and then decide for themselves, okay, take vocabulary. You give a student a list, they might know 20% already. So what's the point of them studying that 20% that they're already capable of using? Let them choose the words that they want to learn, need to learn, and then show them ways in which they can go about that learning. Show them ways to produce language. In the classroom, for example, communicative writing plays a large role. Not community in the classroom, cooperative writing plays a large role, where 2-3 learners sitting together and they're writing a story together, they're writing a letter together, they're negotiating, discussing what to say, how to say it. That's something
how would you just in the autonomous learning kind of scenario then, what exactly would you how would you describe the role of the teacher while all this is going on? Is it his or her role just to provide the materials and the context, or
no, it's more than that. It is the materials and the context, but it's also showing learners how to do certain things. So again, for the little ones, it could be how to make their own little books, how to make their own dominoes or word cards. For older learners, to show them how to go about this cooperative writing, for example. So it's a lot of how to do things, scaffolding in that respect, providing scaffolding in terms of language as well, but on demand. So it's not saying you need to know this in order to, but to say, okay, this is a task, or you're going to work on this topic or this project, and then they come and they say, how do you?
Yeah.
And then you provide the scaffolding.
All right.
So
Okay.
it's,
Interesting. Okay.
yeah.
So you
That's
do
where
make
that's where
sorry,
this
another.
individualization comes
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
saying
Uh-huh.
what we provide is geared to the needs of the learners.
You do
Sorry
make a
to
point, don't you, in the book of differentiating between language acquisition and language learning, right? I think a lot of us teachers are more focused on the just teaching them and then just sitting there and hoping that they learn something, right?
Yes. Well, that's, yes, learner autonomy really focuses
Yeah,
on the learning.
right,
And that, if you also take in John Hattie with his concept of visible learning and then also visible teaching, but what he tells us is we need to look at how learning takes place. And then we need to look at the role of the teacher and what can we teachers do to be effective. But what are factors that are conducive to learning? What do you need in a classroom? Also, if you look at the setup of the classroom, the atmosphere, is there respect and tolerance, for example, amongst the learners?
right.
Do they feel accepted and respected, comfortable?
Mhm.
Those are factors that will also influence learning.
Right,
And the thing that we need to be aware of is we can do anything we like. That isn't going to guarantee that learning will take place.
right,
So how do I find out that learning is actually happening?
right. You said that we need a way to find out if the students are actually learning something. So I guess that brings us on to the whole idea of evaluation, which is the very interesting article you wrote in the latest edition of the MELTA News. Perhaps you'd like to go into that in a bit of detail.
Yes, evaluation is finding out what learning or what else is taking place, and it can take different angles. It can be in the form of self-evaluation, peer evaluation, and of course teacher or instructor evaluation. So those are different ways to go about it. We tend to only be aware of evaluation or assessment from the teacher's point of view. Again, learner autonomy, as it wants to empower students and learners,
Right.
is trying to give them the tools to evaluate themselves. So
Right.
and that's one of the examples I give in the article. One of the things they can do is, for example, after they've had a little conversation with their neighbor, evaluate how good was our conversation in terms of fluency, in terms of points of interest, in terms of were we even speaking English the whole time, or did we switch back to German because we ran out of vocabulary or we ran out of things to say.
Right.
And by doing that, learners are becoming much more aware of what am I actually doing? And that enables them again to set their own goals in terms of, okay, this is something I'd like to be able to
Right.
do better.
Right. Right. So it's definitely a motivational factor.
Yes, and evaluation in learner autonomy is seen like as a hinge, as a turning point.
Right.
It's something you need looking back. What have I just done? Looking forward, what can the next step be? It's something teachers, of course, have to support. They need to show their learners how to go about. For example, I, together with my students, when they're giving presentations, we collect criteria for a good presentation. What's involved? It's making eye contact, speaking clearly, perhaps using a little bit of body language, not too much, moving a little bit, speaking, having a clear structure as far as content goes and so on. So we collect all those together. We have them on a poster again. That's something I mentioned in the article.
Yeah.
And then after each of them has given a presentation, they have these criteria to evaluate themselves and their peers to say, okay, you did a good job because, and they're very much more aware of what does it take to give a good talk or to give a good
Right.
presentation or
Right.
to
Right.
write a good letter or write a good
Right.
story.
Can I just ask you one final thing there? What's your view on testing and exams as far as evaluating students' level or progress is concerned?
Well, it's something that's expected. It's something
Mm.
that the German school system, for example, forces us to do.
Yes, yes.
The exams, they could just come as something that's at the end of schooling and takes you on to the next stage. Um, I I don't believe that it's a natural situation. I think we're tested in life. And I think
Mm.
that life, for example, in our workplace, will test us in completely different ways from the
Right.
way that exams and tests work. So I think they're not really helpful in terms of preparing us for life and
Mm-hmm.
passing on life skills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they're there. And as long as they're there, we have to prepare our students. They have to know the formats. They have to be able to work with the time limit that's given and all the
Right,
other,
right, 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 right.
the
So,
framework of exams.
right. Just one final thing, I think, Birgit, we better wrap. As I said, I could go on all evening. It's very, very interesting. But one final thing, talking of the German education system, I remember reading one of the things you said, and I'm going to quote, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote something you yourself said. And I'm quoting you. You said that Germany needs to become much more aware and appreciative of the benefits of multilingualism beyond the elite languages of English, French, and Spanish. Perhaps you'd like to just say something about that.
Well, it's something you notice when you go through Munich, for example. You
Yeah,
have the bilingual announcements on the Underground and the
sure,
S-Bahn now,
sure.
which is great for tourists. You go to the KVR in Poccistraße, and they now have these massive
Mm,
boards
mm,
of beautiful displays in German and in English.
yes,
Now, most of the people who go to Poccistraße and don't speak German well enough to understand the German description of the different departments and sections to go to probably aren't as capable of speaking
right.
English or reading English either. So, on the other hand, people come with all their linguistic background. They come
Sure,
speaking languages, being able to converse, to tell stories,
sure.
to do their jobs in their first languages. We see that now with all the Ukrainians who are coming,
Right.
and many of whom are finding it immensely difficult to find work because the German workplace is so restricted to
Mm,
German and perhaps English. Yes, and with the children who are coming as well, they
mm,
have languages to build on because, as I was saying earlier, every language resource that we have at our disposal
mhm,
enables us to learn an additional language more easily, more quickly.
mhm.
So that's how polyglots work. You know,
Right,
they have
right,
8 or 10 languages, and then number 11
right,
and number 12 just come like that. They know
right,
what how languages work. They have this sort of metalinguistic knowledge. They can relate
right.
vocabulary or structure or
Yeah.
just see the different patterns.
Mhm,
And children and teenagers and adults do as well. So
mhm,
yeah, and I think it's time that we here in Germany came to realize that in most parts of the world, people grow
mhm,
up speaking several languages. You know, we have this sort of
mhm,
German view that
mhm,
if you don't have German, then it's no
mhm,
good at all. It might be English or French, but everything else isn't really helpful.
mhm,
In other parts of the world, be they Africa or India, people
mhm.
grow up speaking 2, 3, 4 languages before they
Right,
even school and
right,
then
right, right.
start learning English, for example.
That is a fascinating thing to think, isn't it? Because I mean, especially as native speakers, English native speakers, we kind of grow up with possibly only one language. But
Mm.
when you look at the situation worldwide, it's quite staggering the difference, right? Yes. And
And
as you said, we should try.
mm,
Yes. Oh, no, sorry. Go on.
I was speaking to one of my students today. She has an Arabic background. She's
Mhm,
learning German and English. And she said, "Can you explain to me what a metaphor is?" So I
mhm,
gave her a couple of examples. And then I said, "I'm sure you have Arabic metaphors." And then
mhm.
we found out that there are some that are the same in Arabic
Oh,
and
wow.
German.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's
there's a
fascinating.
lot
Yeah.
more that we have in
Right,
common
right,
than
right.
we actually know about.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a lovely place to finish off, I think, Birgitta. I just want to ask you one last thing, and I promise this is the last thing. Uh, if you had to give any listening or watching teachers a piece of advice, off the top of your head, what would that be?
Be who you are and try to get to know your students as they are. So let this be something that's taking place between real people. I know most of the people working for MELTA aren't working with children and teenagers, are working more with adults.
Mhm.
And I think to say this is also about meeting people, being in contact in a relationship, and language is the essential element that we need to build relationships. So, and take it from where they are, try to find out what their interests are, because that as a motivating factor is a very strong driving force.
That's wonderful. Birgitta, thank you so much. That was fascinating. I loved it. As I said, I could go on for longer. Well, we'll have to ask you back next year for part two.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I tend to ramble.
No, absolutely. Well, if you do ramble, it's very interesting rambling, so don't worry about it. Viewers and listeners, look out for another Melter podcast next month, and also for some exciting new developments in that we have in the pipeline here on the Melter podcast. Please visit our YouTube channel, and it would be great if you subscribed. And if you want to leave a comment or two, that would be fantastic too. Thank you for watching or listening, and see you again soon.